Salaam Alaikum. Mr. Moderator, our distinguished guests, brothers and sisters, our friends and our enemies.
Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. Ya Rabbana thabbit aqdamana wa'fu 'anna wa kun ma'na wa la takun 'alayna warhamna waghfir lana dhunubana wa nusalli wa nusallim ala ad-dawam ala alladhi arsaltahu bil huda wa din al-haqq. I was listening to a portion of a talk that Mufti Muneer gave with regard to the nations.
To NOI sciences. If you're speaking about the nation of Islam, then I say without any doubt. And we've said this many times before. Well, alhamdulillah, we talked about this just now, IMFC. We're talking about economics and finance. And we don't go in extreme in hating or loving any people. And to be real and to be honest, I'll say it if someone doesn't like it or gets upset or whatever, the truth is the truth. The nation of Islam, no doubt, the fruit of Islam, they have made many contributions to society, to civil rights, and to, whether we like it or not, to the establishment and the growth and evolution of Islam. And the da'wah to Islam in this country and in other countries. I say that openly and publicly. Not seeking the reward or benefit of anybody or fearing no harm from anybody. I have no reason to suck up to someone. I don't have no connections. They're not giving me no checks. Nor am I afraid or scared. But you say the truth. So different sciences, different things that they brought, as long as they're not against the teachings of Islam, as long as they don't contradict the Kitab and the Sunnah, why wouldn't we take them? Why wouldn't we benefit from them? Let alone the fact that they may have a science or practice or experience or knowledge that they were the only ones or no one else that did it, or it's something that they uniquely had. We should learn from that. We should benefit from that. And I would say from the remnants of those early movements and those early calls, and you're talking about groundbreaking stuff now, okay? If you look at the history of this country, I mean, just, community life, respect for an imam, protection of the leader, loyalty to one's leader, okay? Economic and financial independence, identity, lack of fear, okay? So many different virtues that they brought in which many other people didn't bring and didn't have. And unfortunately today, people, they forget about it, or they ignore it, or they're warned against, it's unfortunate. Instead of trying to give them dawah, and obviously the different levels, Nation of Islam, Ward of Deen, different levels, different evolutions. Give them da'wah, call them, invite them to the truth. And you'll be shocked. And the last thing I'll say, I want to make a long answer. Every person that I've met from the Nation of Islam and talked to, or Ward of Deen, or whatever transition, were extremely respectful people.
Our brother Ustad Colin, he did a commentary on that talk, and to be honest with you, the brief exposure to the contents of what both Mufti Muneer was saying and what Brother Colin was saying was very refreshing. One of the things that was brought to the fore, which I align with, and I have a bias toward, not against, in favor of, a bias in favor of, is that we need to take a different strategy, especially with how we deal with our community. We live in a time period which is much different than 20 years ago, 15 years ago, which is much different than 40, 50 years ago. There were stages in the da'wah, and what I mean by the da'wah is that there were stages in the way that the community developed itself and that struggle for growth. There were things that took place in the past which were part of the process of getting to where we are at now. There was a time period where we can make the claim that there's confusion that will result from interacting with different people different peoples and different groups. But we live in a time period where in reality, if we took the means of dialogue, even the whole concept of the Quranic concept, idfa' billati hiya ahsan, which has a lot to do with how it is that we engage with people. Taking on the means of what is good, beneficial, excellent, what's sincere, and so on and so forth, in the way that we engage with people, weighing harm and benefit, and always keeping in mind the principle al-Muslim huwa dhu al-akhlaq, that the Muslim is a person, or the Muslim has a persona of manifesting the best characteristics and quality in character. And so when we talk about the past and we look at different environments and different scenarios, and I was having a discussion with some brothers in the Midwest, and we were talking about the reality of places like Philadelphia and the position, the specific of the indigenous, more specific, the black Muslim community in Philadelphia, and where it stands at today, and the position of the black Muslim community in the Midwest. And part of the reality that was brought to the table is that in Philadelphia, regardless of what we present as far as negatives, there has been growth in the indigenous community in many ways. And what comes to the fore in that type of discussion is to understand the history and the causes and the backdrop and the background to that reality of why it is that Islam, despite the current challenges that exist in Philadelphia, why it is that it rooted itself and why it is that it grounded itself. And part of what came up in that discussion, no doubt, is the role that the Nation of Islam played in that. That's not to say that others didn't play a role. That's not to say that there weren't other contributions. That's not to say that there weren't setbacks, that there were not issues. But if I understood Mufti Muneer correctly in terms of methodology, there's two things that came to the fore in listening to him speak. And that, firstly, these two things, let me say this, these two things are universal. That is that we have to move on what is proper and aligned with Islam. So part of what follows up that principle is that the principle of the Muslim being the possessor or the owner or the seeker of wisdom. And so wherever that wisdom, because that wisdom contains benefit and goodness may be found, that we may claim to that experience. In other words, we benefit from that experience. If we find that there is an experience which a community has, regardless of their background, regardless of who they are, and we find that they have achieved a certain level of understanding and insight that others don't have, and it is supportive of the good or the khair that is within Islam itself, then we ourselves avail ourselves of that reality. We take benefit from it. That is a more productive and a more virtuous and scholarly approach to dealing with humanity and dealing with others that we differ with on certain issues. In other words, just because we differ with people on certain things, we can't necessarily write off the good that they have. That's just not a methodological principle that's to be considered sound. That we write off people because we write off the good that they have because we don't agree with. It's like someone speaking truth and we negate that truth just because we differ with them on issue. That doesn't make any sense. The other issue is that when we look at the reality of the community, and this is something that I've noticed in Mufti Muneer's talks, when we look at the reality specifically of the indigenous community, and I think that at times, when we talk about the black experience, we forget that there's the Latino experience, and we forget that there are differences, but there's overlaps as well. The Nation of Islam has historically championed certain realities for the black community, and as a consequence that has impacted the Latino community. But also the Nation of Islam has a long history in dealing with the Latino community, right? And I think is more manifest now than it was in the past for many people. I know personally people years ago, decades ago, Puerto Ricans that were part of the Nation of Islam. There were even Mexicans that were part of the Nation of Islam years ago, decades ago. And they even had an imam, a Mexican imam. Even when it comes to the issue of the bean pie, the famous bean pie, the sister that is accredited with it, her husband was Mexican. And so there was a struggle that was there in trying to understand that reality. And the reason why I bring that up is because I like to characterize the indigenous community in noting the differences between the black and the brown community, but also noting the unique points. But the nation, there's no doubt that the nation has been successful on many experiential fronts. The front of organizing the community, the front of individual and personal change and development, the economic front, the whole idea of collective economics, the idea of institution building, education, and just even if you go into the idea of working with re-entry and working with cases which many of us don't want to deal with, and many of us don't have the capacity or the success rates of dealing with, and that is the transformation of people who have bottomed out due to societal and psychological issues. We don't necessarily have to agree with the tenets of Aqidah in the Nation of Islam, but that doesn't write off whatever good is there. We do it in many instances. It has been done historically, and sometimes with good results, and sometimes with bad results, and sometimes with neutral results. We see the whole civilization of Al-Andalus was about engaging other cultures, other orientations, and taking what was good and Islamicizing what was beneficial and reforming what was problematic. That's just the nature of reality. You understand what I'm saying? So the idea of the us and them philosophy, maybe there was a time when that was necessary in order to create a distinguished or a distinct identity. But now we're at a stage where we can dialogue, and that is not a new reality. I think Mufti represents a younger generation of scholarship, and I consider him to be a person of scholarship, and even though, what I'm saying, some people may agree with that or not, that doesn't concern me. I consider Mufti to be a person of scholarship. He represents a younger generation, but Imam Siraj in the past took that approach. We have some people that are fire setters, and they are hot-headed in the way that they approach things, and maybe some people may get mad at me for that type of labeling, but they automatically come with the war mode when it comes to groups like the nation, or when it comes to other people in general, and they have 1,000 excuses as to why it is that we should have a hostile position. And I myself personally have never taken that position towards the Nation of Islam or towards many other groups except those that openly engage in hostility towards us. But that's not the nation's approach. There may be differences in the past in places like Newark, New Jersey. There may have been conflicts, and that has a lot to do with what was going on the ground. And in some places there may be issues, but you find that because of the discipline in the nation and the leadership structure, people will be reprimanded for their lack of character and their lack of controlled and mature orientation. I've seen it myself in certain situations that I don't want to bring up at the moment, but I've lived the experience, and I've seen actually that what happens is that many of us that claim to be the people of the Sunnah, we're people that lack discipline. But the concern for the indigenous community, specifically the black community, and as part of the Latino Muslim leadership, we already demonstrate that we have a concern for the Latino Muslim community. And myself, in my experience, I always make sure that the black and the brown concern is put on the table. But there has to be, a way that we deal with organizations that are helping us to build society and build community, in which we can go into some sort of cooperative agreement with them and benefit from their experience. It's very clear where we stand on issues of Aqidah. We're beyond that at this point. We're at another level that needs to manifest itself. And the level that needs to manifest itself is learning how to benefit from the experience of others while maintaining our values, while maintaining our principles. There's no harm. Those that are not pushing harm against us, even if we don't differ, even if we don't agree on points of on certain points of Aqidah, there's other areas that we can cooperate. And this has been a controversial point because people have to understand the role of politics, which comes back to the issue of sharing the resources and organization of communities. If the Prophet ﷺ in the Constitution of Medina can go into a contractual agreement with other religious groups that differ with the Muslim community in points of Aqidah, when we start looking at the prophetic practice, we see, that there are examples in which the Prophet ﷺ acknowledged the cooperation in good in the past, the cooperation in goodness, and so that's something that we have to recall, that the Prophet ﷺ acknowledged in the period of Jahiliyyah, when there was the pursuit of justice and goodness for the sake of
paper gold. You see, black folks are chumps. If America were to tell you to bring all the rocks in this country to her, and she'll give you $1 million for it, you'll do it. And the next day she'll tell you we're using rocks for currencies, chump.